Okay, welcome back again. So in this video, we're going to talk about the first project that I created in this semester, which was my learning narrative project. So this learning narrative project was a project for you to talk about a time in your life when you experienced something related to learning. And when I first got this project assignment, I knew right away what I was going to talk about. So back in 2019, which is about a year and a half ago, in January of 2019, my dad passed, and it was a long road to get there, but then he passed very suddenly. So I knew exactly what I was going to talk about because I wanted to talk about learning how to become a caretaker to my father, because my brother and I became his primary caretakers throughout his illness, and then how I actually kept going with my life throughout this time too. This project was hard for me to write about because whenever you're writing about a tragic time in your life, it's hard because you kind of replay everything that happened in your head. But two, it's kind of nice to write about because you kind of get what you experienced out there, and it allows other people to see what you've gone through as a person. But in writing, I feel like it's more meaningful than you just saying it in words, because I feel like a lot of time when you talk to people, they can't actually process what you're saying in like that amount of time, whereas if they're reading something, they're like, oh my gosh, this actually happened. And it was another like way, like on the outside, you don't see what people go through when you first meet someone, and you can't see like all the struggles that they've had in their life until you actually get to know them. So this project was super meaningful to me, and I was actually excited to write about because writing was one of the ways that I coped with losing my father, and it was nice to write about and kind of see how I grew during that time and how I grew as a person dealing with the grief of my father. So there's two main points that I wanted to talk about in this video, which were two things that I loved about my paper, which are actually the introduction and the conclusion. So I'm actually going to read them for you. So my introduction, it states, so my paper was actually called Against the Odds, and I titled it Against the Odds because I was 17 years old when I lost my father, and you don't normally think of losing your parent at 17. I know there's many kids like around the world that lose their parents at super young ages, but you never think that it's going to happen to you until it actually does. And so I wrote this paper Against the Odds because I thought that throughout this time I persevered through everything I had been through, and I wanted to just put that out there. So my first favorite part about this paper was my introduction, which was when I introduced my dad. So it says, "He was my first love. He was the light of my life. Growing up, I admired him for all of his qualities, but his hard work and love for his children shined above all else. Dedicated to his laborious job in my young years, he did everything he could for my brother and I when he had the opportunity, and I cherished the time I got to spend with him more than anything. This was my father, the loving, bright man that I was honored to call Dad. His strength was showed through all of his endeavors during his life, but especially when tragedy struck in the last couple of years." And I love this paragraph because it kind of sums up my dad and who he was, and he was just this amazing man that I've looked up to my whole, like the whole 17 years, and he was my life, and he was, safe to say, he was my hero. He was definitely the best dad I could have ever asked for. And then I really loved my conclusion because it kind of summed up my main points in my essay, and basically I talked about how I went through this dark time in my life and how I coped with it and the things that I used, and writing was actually a big one that I talked about in my essays. I used writing to like let out my emotion and to get out how I was feeling during this time. And so my conclusion was one of the things that I really liked about this paper, and it says, "This devastating time in my life impacted me greatly. Growing throughout this process was not effortless. I bared setbacks. I failed. However, I eventually triumphed over the odds and continuously grew as a person and a learner. Assimilating to my new life was formidable, but adapting as part of maturing and maturation was necessary to heal from this experience. Now, I appreciate every day that I remain, and I am thankful and prepared for the challenges life ahead because I have seen how precious life is and how fast it can be taken from you." And those two points of my essay were kind of like my favorite, because I got to talk about my dad and this amazing person that he was, but then at the end of this, I got to talk about what I learned from this experience and how I grew from it, and to kind of show that all of us go through super hard times in your life, but that life does go on, and that you can persevere through them, and that you can come out on top of the odds that are given against you. And so I loved this paper. It was probably my favorite paper to write during this semester, because I got to talk about someone who was most important to me. But I just wanted to make this video to explain a little bit about what I created and my favorite parts of each of my papers, and then go into how I actually created these papers. So yeah. Okay, welcome back again. So we're going to talk about my second project that I created in the semester, which was the cultural artifact analysis. And this project, you were supposed to talk about an artifact that somehow connects you to a culture that you are a part of. And originally when I got this project, I was completely blank as to what I was going to write about this project. I had no ideas, because I was like, I don't know what I'm a part of. I haven't really felt anything. And then one day it kind of just like popped in my head. I had gone through the initial stages of the writing process that Professor McKinnon had showed us, and through the invention stage, and I try to come up with a bunch of different ideas, but none of them were really clicking, and they didn't feel like something I could really talk about in depth as to how this artifact really bonded me with the culture that I was part of. And then one day I thought about my binky, or blanket, so I called it my binky. I named it my binky when I was growing up, and that's what it's been ever since then. But this was another project that I got to kind of talk about something that means a lot to me, which made this project a lot of fun. I actually loved writing this paper too. But this project was titled More Than a Blanket, because to me, I still have my binky. I'm a freshman in college, and I still have my binky. I take it wherever I go. Obviously not like wherever I go, but if I'm ever spending the night somewhere, or I do take it to college, it comes with me every single night. I never spend a night without it. But this blanket, I thought that I could write about it, and it would be super fun, because the blanket kind of connects me to my family culture, and how no matter where my family is or anything like that, my blanket can always be a symbol of my family. And like the learning narrative project, I could kind of go in depth, and I learned like more about myself when I wrote this project, and I actually learned how much more my blanket means to me than I really think it does, because I really don't know if I could do a lot of things unless I have my blanket there for me, because it's like that grounding piece for me. It really is one thing that I have in my life that means a lot to me. So I'm going to talk about a few of my favorite points from this essay, which my introduction and my conclusion were again two of my favorite points from this essay. But there's one paragraph that I included that talks about how I've learned how much more my blanket means to me than I really thought it did, and how what it does for me nowadays in my life, being older than when I was younger. Because when you're younger, you don't really realize how much things mean to you until you get to that point, and you can kind of like comprehend the things. So my introduction, in my introduction, you kind of wanted to state what your artifact was and how it related to my culture. And I actually really liked my introduction, because I didn't come right out and say what my artifact was. I kind of gave like a description of what it is and what it does for me, but I didn't come out and say it until the second paragraph. And then in the paragraphs following that, I talked about how that connects me to my family culture. But my introduction says, an indescribable spell that grounds me, a simple touch that relieves the stress that the day entailed, feeling of support and relaxation brought on by something so simple. The twisting and turning to find new aromas, the deep inhales and slow exhales, and the gradual decrease in large beats felt throughout my chest are liberating and bring me back home. So that was my introduction, and that was one of the things I'm most proud of about this paper, because I was able to use, this is where I started to kind of work on the points that I wanted to work on, using imagery and other things to like draw your reader in to like actually want to read your paper. And I didn't come out and say that this was a blanket in my introduction, but I came and like described what my blanket kind of does for me. And then another one of my favorite points in this paper was the paragraph before my conclusion, where I kind of talked about how I've grown to understand what my paper does for me in my life today, being an adult. And I said, over the past few years, my emotional attachment to my blanket has increased significantly. The death of my father at age 17 was the greatest hardship I have endured. I turned to my blanket to not only offer me the comfort it normally brings, but as an object that my dad once touched that could serve as a way to hold on to a piece of him. When I miss him, I can turn to my blanket and think about him. The grease smell from his work pants slowly flows in, or even the smell of his cologne before a family dinner. Every day I long for my father's company. After accepting the impossibility of that, I use my blanket to feel an attachment to him in a new way. Now, a college student living away from home, I've come to understand how much more my blanket actually means to me. The luxury of coming home to my family every day, or the ability to smell the scents that remind me of home, no longer exist. Without my blanket by my side, this adjustment to my new life would be much more arduous, even impossible. Additionally, the stress of college sometimes seems unmanageable, but when I can take a break and hold my blanket, I am able to clear my head and calm myself down. As I became older, I finally grasped that my blanket was something more than an object. And so that's where I kind of brought to home my title of this, and that's kind of what I wanted to do in this paragraph, is explain why it's more than a blanket to me. Because I mean, I have tons of blankets that I just use as for warmth or decoration or something like that, but my binky or my blanket became that symbol that really connected to me, to my family, and became another symbol that connected me to my father. But it connected me to my whole family. My mom, it would smell like my mom's perfume or things like that. When I would like leave home for a little while, it would smell like her, so I'd be reminded of her. Or things that connected to me, my brother. And then my Nana actually knitted this blanket for me, so it connected me to her in one way, because I'll have like a piece that I can always hold on to that she made for me. So this was another paper that I really liked writing because it made me explore more about myself, but then it also helped me to become a better writer because I could write about something more interesting. But rather than just kind of explaining everything, I could write about it more in like an in-depth way and kind of explore different ways to write about and include different literary elements. So yeah.